Good morning. So, when I was coaching people, one and very important part always for me was to ask them about their childhood. I know people are like, that was in the past. What difference does that make? We know now that sets us up for our whole life unless we go to therapy and gain some self awareness because this is how our childhood sets us up for life. First of all, it's what we learn, right? It's called our programming. What we learn from our parents, the way that they treat us, the way that they treat each other, the things we're allowed to get away with. And it's not just something that's in the past because it shapes us. And this is how. Um, Children are very smart and very adaptable, and they observe everything. So, if, for example, a child is when they cry, they can come to you and they're comforted. They learn that going to people is safe. However, if they cry and they're ridiculed, they learn to shut down their feelings as a way of coping to grow up in that home. And they don't maybe consciously do it, but maybe they do. Well, I'm just not going to cry. I'm not going to show my feelings. So they become walled off from their feelings. If the parents are very busy, they learn, they start going to their parents for comfort, but the parents are very busy, so they learn, I can't go to anyone for comfort. I have to rely on myself. Or if the parents shame them for going to them for comfort or a problem, they learn that having a problem is a sign of weakness. I get punished for that. So those are ways that people might learn to be disconnected from their feelings, completely. Or in worst cases, there are many children who were abandoned. Even if the parent just died or they grew up in foster care or adopted, they will often feel abandoned. And that's a big wound. Or worse, there's so many people, when I worked with people, I was shocked how many people were abused, violently abused, hit, stabbed, um, um, told that they were, I wish you'd never been born, um, and sexually abused. And that, is trauma to the body. That's trauma for life. Then they grow up not trusting people, not feeling safe in the world. And then also, it's how we observe our parents interacting with each other. Was dad nice to mom, or did he hit her? Was dad a womanizer, or was he devoted to his family and his work? And I think that boys will often look up to their dad, and women often look up to the moms. And as adults, people have these behaviors, and then they seem kind of unaware of their behaviors. They are not aware of how they are copying what their parents did. I have not just working with people, but also taking some courses, some therapist courses for working with couples. I've taken quite a few of Terry Real's couples courses. And I took 2 of his couples workshops where he worked in front of like a few thousand therapists. We could take the course. I'm not a therapist, but I was a life coach, and we could observe how he worked with couples and did inner child healing. And these couples had huge breakthroughs. And it was all about what did you observe? What happened to you? And what did you do that you were allowed to get away with? So like men who would get, they would be really great husbands, set a world off, but when they got angry, they would resort to some very aggressive, violent behavior, maybe not hitting the woman, but throwing things or something like violent. And those guys often grew up either entitled, they were allowed to get away with being bullies as kids because their parents had no boundaries, or they saw that's what dad did, and then they automatically slipped into that. So it's all very interesting, but so I wanted to lay that as the groundwork. A lot of people are in denial about how their childhood shaped them because they don't want to look at their childhood. They subconsciously do not want to go there because it was painful. And they want to think that, well, that was my childhood. I'm an adult now. But see, the other part too of your childhood is trauma is stored in your body. And when we are growing up, our brain is pruned by the experiences we have. We make decisions about how to behave and what is safe and not safe. So our brain actually responds to what is going on around us. People, for example, who have borderline personality disorder, they have a very small amygdala, a smaller amygdala. So it's always, and it's on constant alert. So they feel everything times 100. And then, of course, people who had a lot of grew up in violent households where they never knew there was a lot of volatility and suddenly someone might scream. You know, they're constantly on alert. Their body is really tense. They're going to have more physical stresses. So as adults, what the idea is, though, as adults, you can do therapy and like deep therapy, not just talk therapy, like hypnotherapy, somatic experiencing, inner child healing, to release all that and to gain awareness of our patterns and to have more powerful ways of interacting. Because otherwise, what everybody does, I'm going to say everybody or most people, they take what they learned in childhood from their parents, consciously and unconsciously, and they stay this whole way their whole lives. So most people are little kids walking around in adult bodies, and they seem very sane, but if you have a little disagreement with them, you see what they're really made of. Like that thing that happened, for example, recently, that I was talking about with my Pilates instructor. Anyway, I mean, we all have our own little patterns. So I wanted to say that first of all. The second thing I wanted to say was, okay, so our programming, we can change it to therapy, but one thing that's really difficult in therapy or in coaching is people don't want to look at their childhood, and they especially do not want to talk badly about their parents. And so people don't want to talk about their childhoods because deep down it can be very uncomfortable, and there's hidden stuff there, and it seems subconsciously people don't want to go there, but that's where the answers lie. I'm sorry to tell you, if you do any studying of psychology or coaching or have been in couples therapy, you will know that you gotta have to go back into your childhood because that's where we learned our patterns. So again, it's about how I was treated, how I was allowed to behave or not to behave. That prunes my brain and my behaviors. How I saw my parents engage, what I saw happening, and what I was allowed to get away with. That's where entitled or narcissistic behavior often comes from, what kids were allowed to get away with. And also how people shut down, how they're avoidant or anxiously attached, even depression and anxiety, and a lot of physical illnesses are trauma related, you know, or people who were sexually abused or who grew up in volatile homes where they never knew when the next shoe was about to drop. But also in relationship, people don't know what's possible if they haven't experienced it. So if all a child ever experienced was a parent who had no room for emotions, people will go through life walled off about their emotions. And that makes for a very bad relationship. So one thing I noticed when I was coaching people is they didn't want to talk about their childhood. But that's where we actually have to go. So the reason I'm making this video is because if you're in a relationship and where you're unhappy in your relationship, the people are not self-aware usually, and I wasn't in my last relationship. I wasn't self-aware to realize that the things that I was trying to be okay with and trying to put up with, the same things that had kind of happened in my childhood home, And I didn't even have any awareness that it was the same thing. And the thing that it was that there was, in my last relationship, there was no room for my full emotional self-expression. And along with that, my full sexual self-expression. Yes, there was sex. Yes, there were emotions, but I'm going to say it was mostly the emotional self-expression that was limited, and that really impacted the relationship and our sex life, really. Because sex that's quick and without emotions, and that's very limited in terms of being just quick and mechanical, is not really that great, you know. It wasn't fulfilling for me. Although I don't want to get into too much details on that because I've talked about it before. I don't want to. The point of the video, though, is that I couldn't figure out for years. Like, I thought, well, relationships are always bad after 2 years because that's what I saw with my parents, right? Or, you know, this is my husband who loves me, and he did. So his limitations in terms of emotional expression were things that I tried to change in him or tried to be okay with my discomfort. And they were all kind of like coping mechanisms that a little child uses. You know, I used little child coping mechanisms of how can I be okay with this? And a little bit of adult, how can I change this by discussing it with him? It never dawned on me until many years later that I was okay with something that was I shouldn't have been okay with. Like, I was unaware. This is what I want to say. Let's see, how can I wrap this up in a nutshell? If you're unhappy in your relationship and you're an introspective person, it's probably something the other person's doing that you're just putting up with and that you're okay with. Especially, well, I don't know. I mean, it could be many things, but I think a good place to look is childhood and like, what is the dynamic that's happening in my relationship that's the same dynamic that was in my childhood. And especially with factors such as I'm not allowed to express myself. Okay, this person is pushing me away. That was the dynamic in my relationship, is when I reached out for emotional closeness or date nights or something with him and me together. If it was of, I don't know, it changed when the kids were gone. There was a lot more closeness, but I was pushed away. There was a limit to how close I was allowed to get. I was pushed away, and that was very painful, but I was okay with it. And I shouldn't have been. I should have been like, if this happens now that I've done all this work on myself, I would have been like, whoa, we're not going to be, you know, goodbye. This is not okay. I'm not going to date someone like you. But it could be other things, like you might be with someone who is volatile and you're okay with that because your parents were volatile and you might not like it, but you won't even see that it's unhealthy and not okay, and that you can have better because you never had better. So there's a lack of awareness because it's the same thing that happened before. I think, do you see what I'm getting at? If you find yourself going on online forums about your unhappy marriage like I did, or, you know, getting frustrated to the point where you're like crying, or you're like, I need someone to talk to, you know, look at the pattern and see how this person is behaving and how that's similar to what happened in your childhood. And the best thing to do is just gain some self-awareness, maybe talk to a therapist. And I mean, in these cases, talking to the spouse doesn't always work because a lot of people don't want to change. But what I have seen in taking some of Terry Real's couples workshops, where we observe, like, it was a course for therapists where we got to observe couples. is that when couples go to therapy and they both work on their patterns, it's magic. Like people create a whole new relationship, and it's a beautiful thing. However, not everybody wants to do that kind of work, and sometimes one person wants to do the work and the other person doesn't. And the only way to resolve it really is a divorce. I think that I think that the the lack of self-awareness can be very painful. It's like I'm in a lot of pain and I don't know why. And it's in my case it was because I was putting up with things that I shouldn't have put up with and I didn't even know. Being pushed away. In your case, it could be someone who's volatile or someone who is irresponsible or someone who's unaccountable or someone who is lying to you or cheating or manipulating you or gaslighting you. I'm a big believer in looking at my own part, but those of us who look at our own part sometimes don't see the pattern that we're allowing in. And my own part isn't just how I'm behaving, but it's also what I'm allowing. And these are things that are often really hard to see. Yeah, these are often things that are really hard to see. And again, it all comes from how we, what we think is okay and acceptable behavior. That's why you see people often going after the same kind of relationship over and over and over. And they're like, well, I don't know why I keep choosing this kind of person. But often that's because I'm that kind of person. So here's the thing. Once I realized I chose someone who's avoidant, because I was okay with that, and I had to rely on myself for comfort as a child, which many children did. Now, in order for me to attract somebody better relationally, I have to be a person who is more not so avoidant, like looking for people who are, well, I don't know. I have to. This is kind of the part I'm working on now. Just to be honest, I'm a work in progress. So, okay, that's the next thing I have to talk about with my therapist is, okay, what kind of man do I want to look for and how do I have to be so that I'm attracted to men? Because I don't like men who are needy and clingy at all. That's a huge fucking turn off. But I no longer want men who are like emotionally avoidant. So, maybe just realizing this is really good, but I have to show up in a different way. I made a video the other day about my Pilates instructor and how when I shared with her what I didn't like, I finally shared with her what I didn't like. She had a very unacceptable reaction. And I told her if this ever happens again, I'm ending our session immediately. And she didn't like that and just iced me out. So speaking up is good because then I can see who can handle me and who can't, who's emotionally, who cares about me and who doesn't, who pushes me away and who doesn't. So I think it's probably about taking a risk and sharing a feeling. I have a lot of female friends who reach out to me to connect with me. Like, it seems like all of my female friends do this. Like, they initiate friendship with me, or they reach out to do something or connect with me or see how I'm doing. And I notice that, and I don't do that as much. I notice that they're reaching out. And I don't do that as much. I respond and I try to reach out, but I'm not so good at it because I'm so used to relying on myself for comfort that I will respond to someone and I will be authentic and I don't ghost or avoid people, but I'm not the one to like reach out for connection. So maybe part of changing my behavior with men, I mean, I say hi to men I see in public or talk to them at the gym, but I don't reach out for like an emotional connection with them. it's more like maybe I need to be a little warmer. I don't know, because maybe the kind of man that I really want is looking for a little bit more warmth. You know, so those are the kind of things that I'm looking at is I'm so glad I started working with this therapist 3 months ago, because I feel like I've accessed more parts of me, um, which is pretty nice. But anyway, I hope that you guys got something out of this video. It's a lot about blind spots, lack of awareness, what am I putting up with, how am I responding? And one big thing I worked on for a long time was the honoring my feelings, reactivity, um, having good boundaries, all that stuff. It's pretty fun. It's pretty fun stuff. Anyway, thank you so much for watching my video, and please leave your comments if you have anything that you want to share about patterns that you allowed, or how you saw your own patterns, or gained self-awareness. Please leave it in the comments, and thank you so much for watching my video.